This podcast is brought to you by WRFL, Radio Free Lexington. Find us online at wrfl.fm. Catch us on your FM radio while you're in Central Kentucky at 88.1 FM all the way to the left. Thank you for listening, and please be sure to subscribe.
Welcome to From the Woods, Kentucky. I'm Lhotka, and I'm here with my co-host, Renee Williams. And today in studio, we have Dr. Jason Swanson, and Dr. Swanson is an associate professor in the Retailing and Tourism Management Department at the University of Kentucky. Today, he's going to talk about forest recreation. Now, it's a pleasure to have you in studio today.
It's great to be here. I'm so excited to talk about what we have to offer in Kentucky and what's happening with forestry around the state.
Great. Well, thank you. Before we get into talking about forest recreation, how did you get involved in tourism in the field?
I grew up working in the industry. I grew up in Virginia Beach, so my first job was in a hotel when I was in high school. I liked it and continued to work in hotels when I was in college. And so by the time I graduated, I had accumulated a few years of experience in hotel management. I got a job right after school traveling around the country installing computer systems in hotels, which gave me a great sense of what there is out there in the country and helped me start thinking about why people travel. So then I got more interested in tourism, and I went back to school to study that. My PhD is in Parks, Recreation, and Tourism from North Carolina State University, and that gave me an interesting opportunity to learn more about outdoor recreation and forest recreation in particular, so that expanded my exposure within tourism to learn a little bit more about outdoor recreation.
Okay. And so what do you do here at UK?
I'm an associate professor in the Department of Retailing and Tourism Management. My focus is tourism. So I teach classes. I teach an intro to tourism management. I also do a lot of education abroad classes focused on the benefits of travel or how travel impacts the traveler. And so it's fun for me to travel with college students to see, what they're getting out of their experience in different countries around the world. So that's been my focus.
That's pretty neat. So where are some of the places you've taken the students?
I've done education abroad to France, Panama, Greece twice. I just returned from a semester abroad in London.
Oh, wow.
My next program, education abroad program, is going to be in Montreal. That's going to be in the fall, so next school year, but this calendar year. So we're starting to recruit for that. We'll go anywhere, pretty much.
Yeah.
And fortunately, my students in hospitality management and tourism are open to traveling. They're very interested in going places, and so it's never hard to recruit my students to travel.
Yeah,
right. So today you're going to talk about forest recreation. So explain a little bit about what that is.
Forest recreation or outdoor recreation a little more broadly is just any sort of activity you would do outside, physical activity. There's different types of recreation than just physical. There's social activities associated with outdoor recreation, so maybe just having a meeting in the woods instead of in a conference room. In addition to just the physical activities that you can do out there, accommodations is also an important part of outdoor recreation. So campsites or more developed cabins in the woods, even less developed cabins in the woods like tree houses. There's all sorts of opportunities to enjoy outdoor recreation in different ways.
I've heard several of our guests in the past that have said something about the benefits of being outdoors. Do you have any kind of benefits with the tourism kind of aspect?
Yeah, for sure. I think anytime you travel, there's always a benefit to be in a new environment, to learn about new cultures and places. And a lot of us, our usual environments, for me, it's definitely true, and probably for most people, our usual environment is not the woods.
Right.
And so when we leave our home, if we live in the city or even the country, we can go into the woods and have a very different experience than what we would normally have at home. So just an expansion of your knowledge through the exposure to new places is one. There's physical fitness opportunities throughout the woods, all sorts of things you can do, hiking, biking, climbing trees, just anything physical related is going to be a benefit, and that often leads to stress reduction as well. So getting out there, being active, and then experiencing nature, whereas you might not get to experience that, or you're sensing your environment in a different way, can often lead to stress reduction. I think another benefit of outdoor recreation is understanding nature, where we might not learn without being there, and so you have a better appreciation for natural areas, and then maybe that leads to some advocacy efforts in the future, or at least you understand maybe some issues that are going on in the news that could be detrimental to nature. You can say, hey, that's important because I understand what the benefits are of being out there in nature. And also think it could lead to an increase in community pride. So what I mean by that is if you're here in Kentucky, there's a lot of rural areas, but maybe we don't always think of the wooded areas in the same way. And getting out into those places can help us have an appreciation for the state. We know about the big things, horses and bourbon, but there's a lot of outdoor recreation opportunities here in Kentucky as well. Some very important attractions, things that would attract people from around the world, such as Red River Gorge, and the rock climbing there is world class. And so once we see that for ourselves and experience that, we can understand why people come from around the world to Kentucky to visit and to participate in some of the things that only happen or only exist here in Kentucky.
Yeah, I guess if you live here or you grew up here, you don't think of here as a place that you would actually visit, which is something that people should actually do.
Yeah, and that's an advantage I have maybe. I've lived here for getting to become a long time. It's been about 10 years or now since I started working at University of Kentucky. But I remember the first time I went to Red River Gorge, and it's an amazing place from the physical geography of it. But then if you pay attention to who's there, you go to Miguel's Pizza, for example, you hear accents from around the world because folks are coming from all over the world for that rock climbing. And then it's fun to interact with them. You can ask them why they're here, and they'll tell you about the great reasons why they came to do the rock climbing specifically, and have conversations about their home and other places that they've been. So if you really want a multicultural experience and you're not able to travel far for the weekend, just go to Miguel's Pizza and have conversations with the folks there. It's good food too.
So where are some of the other places that you like to go?
When I traveling with students particularly, I like to think of travel as a multi-sensory experience. And the same thing's true for recreation, I think. One thing I learned in my PhD program, which is Parks, Recreation, and Tourism, is recreation is, break down the word, so recreation. You can go and recreate yourself, specifically in some outdoor recreation. So it's, I think a forest environment allows a great place for us to kind of recreate ourselves if we stop and pay attention to what we're doing, and that involves a kind of a full sensory experience. And that's important. What I try to communicate with my students when we're traveling is to take it all in from all of your senses. And one of my favorite full sensory experiences while traveling was in a tropical rainforest in Panama while I was leading an education abroad program. We had some free time, and some of the guys, it was just this four or five guys and myself who wanted to do zip lining. None of us had ever done it before. So we see this opportunity, let's go zip line in Panama. And it was quite an experience for the first time ziplining. I mean, we were driven about 15 minutes up the mountain, and then we hiked in another 10 minutes just to get to the first of 14 zipline platforms. And we had 14 platforms to get down to the bottom. I think it was about 3,000 feet or so on the lines. So it's a pretty big zipline operation for some folks who had never done it before, and we're all pretty afraid. But from a sensory perspective, when I think back on that, I can still picture it. And I saw the tree canopy below me, and then as I worked my way down through the forest, I saw the tree canopy beside me and above me, and I kind of felt like I was a leaf falling through the tree canopy. I heard the whizzing of the metal wheels racing at 60 miles an hour down those cables that were also wet from a light misting rain. And then if you listen closely, you could hear a howler monkey whooping off in the distance, something that I had never heard before. As we worked our way down, I could smell the forest, the life in the forest, the sense of vegetation and moisture and soil and decaying wood, and that intensified as I got closer to the ground. So from a taste perspective, which is often hard in outdoor recreation, I don't know, I probably got a few bugs in my teeth as I was going down, because I realized that I really liked ziplining. So I was smiling a lot, and it was one of my favorite activities. So what did I feel? And I felt fear at first, for sure, and that turned into exhilaration as I felt accomplished and then inspired to try other new personal challenges in the future. And for me, travel is an important way to do that. But that particular forest experience was one of my favorite travel memories. So I want to talk a little about sensory experiences in the forest. All right?
Sure.
So Laura, what's your favorite season of the year? Winter, spring, summer, fall?
Probably fall.
Fall?
Yeah.
All right. So I want you to close your eyes.
Okay.
All right. You too. Renee, close your eyes. Everybody who's listening, close your eyes. If you're driving, close your eyes.
No, please don't.
Pull over the car, yeah. I'm picturing 1 million cars on Nicholasville Road pulled over to the side. There's always 1 million cars on Nicholasville. All right. So, Laura, you're hiking in a Kentucky forest during the fall. What do you hear?
I think the leaves crunching under my feet.
Under your feet, and maybe an occasional stick snaps when you step on it. It's one of my favorite sounds. So what are you seeing?
The colors. I love the fall colors. Yeah.
How does it feel?
Good. It's not too hot, which I like. But it's not cold, so I think that's what I like about the fall the best.
Yeah. Is it, how about the smells? What can you smell?
Like the dry leaves and maybe a little like wood smoke and stuff.
Oh, yeah. That's
I
great.
always like that.
That's actually, that just brought back a memory for me when you said the wood smoke. And being in London, my house was right on the canal, one of the canals when there's boats out there, and they would heat the boats with charcoal and
neat.
wood.
Yeah.
And that's the smell that I think of when I think of London. So I hadn't thought of it until you said that. So if you were to go in a different season, it would have a very different experience. You could be in the exact same place, smell different things and see different things, feel a different way. You could go 4 times a year and be in the same place and have a completely different experience. And that's one thing that I think is important about outdoor recreation, particularly. Yeah, you can open your eyes. Particularly in the woodlands, is because it does change. It's like nature's theme park, right? There's always going to be something different. You can go at different time. So from a tourism perspective, traveling to a place over and over and over again, the forests provide an opportunity for us to be in the same place and to have a very different experience than if we were to go to a theme park, as an example, and maybe it's the same time after time, but you can go to the forest. And then there's other ways to enjoy the forest than just hiking, right? So we could think about how our sensory experiences might be if we were hunting, what those sounds might be, or if we were camping or bird watching or just tree climbing or other things to do in the forest. I think that's important as we, like what we were saying before, you might not realize what's here, but then you visit it once, go again, and see how it's different the next time.
Well, and just for us, too, it depends on what discipline you're in forestry, too, because where some of the wildlife folks might be looking for deer or squirrels or snakes or whatever, and some of them, though, would be flipping over rocks to see what they're going to find under a rock, whereas other people may just be walking through the woods and to see what's there.
Yeah, we bring our own perspectives with us. That's true. And it's one important thing to think about that is whoever you're traveling or doing this recreation with is going to have their perspective. So you could have a very different experience depending on the people who you're with. If you take your kids, that's going to be one type of experience. That would be different than if you just went with your friends or your parents, or maybe if somebody wasn't able to get around as easily as you. So that's just another example, I think, of being able to experience the same thing, the same place, in a different way. Or I also like to sometimes take my shoes off and walk. Walk in, go on a easy hike. You don't want to get stuck without your shoes, but walk in with your shoes on and then take them off and walk out, and think about how that experience is going to be different and where you focus your attention. You're probably looking down at the ground a little bit more than you would be if you had shoes on. And so, what was it like when you went in? And maybe you're looking up and around, and now you're just focused more on what that feels like and what's down there. And you might see a new animal that you wouldn't otherwise spot.
Tourism and the state. I'm assuming tourism brings a lot of income to Kentucky?
It does, yeah. There's a government office in Frankfort that's responsible for promoting tourism to the state. A lot of the focus is on horses and bourbon, and they had a recent initiative on food. Outdoor recreation is an important part of that too. And if you go to the state tourism website, there's a whole section on outdoor recreation because they want people to get to get out there, who, people who are coming for maybe horses or bourbon, they can say, hey, there's this other stuff you can do too. Or you can just come for that. The state park system is really great here in Kentucky. There's lodges where you can stay in different types of accommodations, typical hotels or get cabins or campsites, and all sorts of activities that you could do in terms of outdoor recreation. And then the lakes are amazing for general outdoor recreation, which is often next to forest environments as well. So there's plenty to do in Kentucky, and it's always surprising when I've talked to people who have recently moved here or students who are from another state. People are always pleasantly surprised by the opportunities to enjoy the state through travel or through recreation.
You've been listening to From the Woods, Kentucky with co-hosts Renee and Laura. We'll be right back after this short break.
Welcome to Wildlife Sounds from the Forest. This is Dr. Matt Springer. I'm an Assistant Extension Professor of Wildlife Management within the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources here at University of Kentucky. I'm here to teach you a little bit about the animals that live in our forests, especially those here in Kentucky. For those of you who might just be joining us, each week we'll play a wildlife sound from our forest. Here's our sound for this week. Stay tuned. Towards the end of the show, we'll talk about this animal and why it is making that sound.
Welcome back to From the Woods, Kentucky. Let's get back to our interview. And do you have a favorite state park or favorite place to go?
I like Land Between the Lakes, and I took some students there. I mentioned the international programs I did before, but I've also traveled with students within Kentucky. A couple years ago, I did a class on, the title of the class was Transformative Travels, Exploring Kentucky, but what that means is we're learning about ourselves and what travel means to us. And the travel component for that class involved 6 days traveling towards western Kentucky, and we stayed in state parks. And also got to experience some outdoor recreation. And that particular class was turned into a TV series for KET.
Oh, neat.
So it aired last year, and it's still available on the KET website, and they'll air it again sometime, hopefully. That experience was taking 10 students from UK, all different majors, and going to different communities throughout the state. And part of what we did was exploring outdoor recreation opportunities. We went horseback riding on a trail in Land Between the Lakes. And then we did orienteering, which is basically getting lost in the woods and trying to figure your way out.
Yeah.
It wasn't too hard. But we had a nice guide at the state park out there who taught us how to read a compass and sent us on the trail. And we had a little quest, and it was fun to just kind of get lost in the woods and find our way out and learn about what it took to survive that experience. It wasn't intense at all. But for some of the students, they had never been in that much of a forest environment,
right.
So it was a new experience for them.
So tell us a little bit about the classes that you do teach and how you connect those to forest recreation or tourism.
Yeah, well, my classes are tourism-based, so I teach the Intro to Tourism class, which is a required class for the hospitality management and tourism majors. I also teach a class called Trends in Hospitality and Tourism, which is a graduate level class, but undergraduates can take it also. And there the students are able to pick an industry sector, and sometimes it is outdoor recreation or national parks or something nature-based that they want to focus on, and then just study that and for the course of the semester in terms of what are the current trends, what are the macro environmental forces such as culture and technology and politics and all the stuff that's happening in the world and how that affects their particular industry sector. I had one student a few years ago who focused on national parks, and she spent the semester learning about those issues that are affecting national parks. And in her learning, she decided to become a vegetarian because of that class. And she's still a vegetarian after, 6 or 7 years. And she's always says it's because of that class. So learning about, as professors, we want to have an impact on students' lives, and sometimes it happens in ways that we wouldn't expect. but it shows that they're getting stuff out of the class.
Right. No, that's good. That's good. Talking about your class and some of the work with that, can you talk about some of those trends that are with outdoor recreation? Or I don't know if your students have found anything in those classes? Or?
Sure. And one of the things we look at are general trends for travel. And I saw one just recently that Airbnb put out. And a lot of the trends related directly to outdoor recreation. So, for example, they said that people are looking for shorter getaways rather than long vacations. And what that means is they're going to stay closer to home, and they're going to look for things that are closer to home. So in Kentucky, for example, there's 45 state parks. And so you're never really far from a state park. No matter where you live, there's going to be multiple options, and you can visit the state parks, and it's more than just woodlands, but there's golf, the lodges, different activities. There's meeting space. You can have a meeting in a state park in an outdoor environment, even if it's inside, but you're looking out over the landscape, the forest landscape. So there's all sorts of opportunities to, here in Kentucky and in most other states too, probably, to take advantage of that trend of people looking for shorter getaways. Minimalism is popular, and what that means in terms of Airbnb is smaller accommodations. So these tiny homes or cabins in the woods or huts in the woods. They even have listed somewhere or a category for shepherd huts that somebody's developed that people are interested in staying in because there's this trend towards minimalism. Another trend was that people want to continue to spend their money on experiences rather than things. So traveling to a place and experiencing a cooking class, for example, as opposed to buying a souvenir that might cost the same thing and you come back and hang it on your wall. People are collecting these experience memories instead of souvenirs. And so that's good for outdoor recreation because they can you can go to a park or a national park or a state park and do orienteering or go on a hike that you otherwise wouldn't, a different experience, or go ziplining or experience nature in a different way that you wouldn't otherwise do. So people are looking for those experiences. And within that experience category of trends, experiencing nature showed the largest growth among baby boomers. Mm-hmm. So we've got this large segment of the population who can travel and have the money to spend on it. And what they say they want to do is experience nature. Mm-hmm. So it's great for outdoor recreation anywhere. Private landowners too. If anybody owns forest lands, looking for new revenue sources is opening up for people to go hunting or hiking or camping or other ways to experience the land. And then that's another trend that's important to outdoor recreation is that travelers are looking to learn about where their food is coming from. Mm-hmm. And there's an extension program at UK, or I think FCS is doing something about cooking wild game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so there's an opportunity for people to travel. You go hunting if you want to do that. Take your food and learn how to cook it right there. So they're experiencing that, and they're seeing exactly where their food comes from in that sense. So there's a lot of national trends that look really good for the suppliers, the people who are providing those services and facilities and places for people who are traveling.
I think it's good for kids to know, too, because I know when my child was 2 or 3 years old, somebody asked her once, "You like tomatoes?" And she said, "Yeah." And he was like, "Where do they come from?" And he was Kroger. He's like, "No, it doesn't. They don't." Yes, they do, but no, they don't. So I, that next year, planted a garden so she could see where tomatoes actually come from. And it's not exactly just the grocery store that she sees. And it was her perception, and it has changed things that way.
One of my cousins had a similar situation with one of her kids, and so they planted a tomato plant. And then when the tomatoes stopped growing, the kid wouldn't eat tomatoes anymore because they didn't come from that. So she would go to the grocery store, get the tomato, put it on the ground, buy the tomato plant, and he would eat it. So it's a lot about perception there.
Right,
but it got him to eat tomatoes, and hopefully he still likes tomatoes.
Right, exactly. You had mentioned extension offices. Do you work with a lot of extension offices around the state?
Not a lot, because it's actually not, I don't have an extension appointment within my job, but we're adding a senior extension associate in the department, retail and tourism management, who will be focused on tourism, and we'll get out into the state. And we did a survey a couple months ago about what the needs are, and a lot are a lot have to do with developing small businesses around agritourism or outdoor recreation. So somebody owns woodlands, and how can they get revenue from that without harvesting the timber if that's not what they want to do? That's going to be something that UK Extension will offer more soon, is some assistance with tourism.
So you've talked a lot about the state parks. What about the Daniel Boone National Forest here in Kentucky?
Yeah, there's some great federal lands as well, including the Daniel Boone National Forest, which includes Red River Gorge. And I read a statistic there in terms of the impact of visitors, such people traveling from more than 50 miles from that particular place. So that could include people from Kentucky or throughout the country or throughout the world. The economic impact from people visiting that site is $50 million a year. So what that means is people are traveling from the outside, bringing their money from the outside and spending it locally within the communities that surround Daniel Boone National Forest, and then some money at the National Forest as well. So that's an important economic engine for the communities that surround that area, and we would find similar numbers at other places, at other federal lands throughout the state and the nation as well. So communities often try to incorporate what the forest has to offer in terms of recreation and travel, and would build hotels in the communities or host events that would try to get people to stay there and try to develop restaurants and the retail opportunities for people to spend their money, because people are coming to these areas and they have the money to spend. So somebody needs to collect that from them so the communities can benefit.
Is that kind of like your teaching is, when a student decides to go into your field, is that kind of what you're training them to do, is trying to build this community aspect? Is that part of it?
Yeah, that's a big part of what tourism is working with the community. So the members of the host community, so the people who live there, as well as the local government officials, the local suppliers, so hotel operators or entrepreneurs in the area, to try to develop the destination so that it can accommodate the visitor and satisfy the visitor, when they come to visit, so that maybe they will want to come again or tell their friends, or do that sort of marketing. So that is part of what we do in the major. We also have hospitality, our hotel and restaurant and that sort of thing tied to it. My focus is more tourism, but a lot of our students are interested in being event planners. So they'll come with that idea and then maybe do that in an internship and want to do more of that, or they do that and then they realize they don't want to do that. So then they get into other opportunities. But we have students working in tourism and a lot in hotels and restaurants and those sort of jobs. Anything you would do on vacation. So you got to eat, you got to stay somewhere, you got to be entertained. So that's what we learn about. Anything that you do when you're on vacation, we learn about the business of that.
I know we kind of touched on this earlier, but what kind of things do you consider that forest recreation would be, other than your natural things that people would think of, like hiking and looking for wildlife or whatever? Are there other aspects that you consider forest recreation that most people would be like, I wouldn't consider that to be forest recreation?
Yeah, in anticipating that question, I just looked at different activities, and I came across a new one called plogging. Not logging, but plogging.
I've not heard about this one.
Not.
Yeah. Picking up litter while you're jogging. So there's races that, it's a two-person race. One person's running, the other person's carrying the trash bag. And the jogger is just picking up stuff. It works in any environment, but particularly in an outdoor space or a natural space, outdoors. Litter just accumulates, and that happens as visitors use a place for recreation. That's just one of the negative impacts of use. And so now there's this idea of plogging to get people to experience nature, and also while you're doing that, picking up some trash along the way. So, you could just walk and pick up trash too, but now it's a contest.
May get more people interested if it's more of a challenge.
Yeah. And again, it's part of the challenge in tourism is to create new experiences for people, and that's what people are looking for. We talked about with those trends. People are looking for new experiences, so that one of the challenges for the tourism developer, the people who work in tourism, is to identify new ways to make it interesting, to keep people wanting to come back to a place where they've been and do something different.
All right. Well, you've given us a lot of information to think about and to actually, the plugging is something I've never thought of. But
You can do that on your way to your car.
Right, there you go. So your UK would appreciate that. Are there any items that you would like to stress to our listeners?
Yeah, I think it's important to just get out there and experience nature. So if it's something that you're not used to doing, there's a lot of easy ways to do it, and there's probably some outdoor recreation places near your house where you could just go on the weekend and spend the morning doing that. And even if it is in your home community, you'll experience your community in a different way if you're intentional about it. So even walking through the park that's in your hometown where you've been before. While you're doing that, think about what you're hearing and what you're seeing and how it feels, and maybe how the air tastes that you haven't thought about your own home environment in the same way before. So there's easy ways to do it, and then become more adventurous. Go a little further. Spend the night in the woods. Go camping, or find a cabin that's comfortable to your whatever you're looking for, and just get out there and do it, because it's easy and it's relatively cheaper in terms of travel than other places. So.
And we have so many beautiful areas here in Kentucky.
We do.
So, we're pretty fortunate.
Yeah, you know, there's one thing that we've done is we used to take the same trail at Veterans Park all the time. It starts and ends at the same spot. So we started going the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how you won't recognize where you're at, because you're having to look around to see where you're actually, at. And it's just because it's the opposite direction.
Yeah.
So even just doing that can change your whole perspective on where you're at.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then you can think about that in other parts of your life too. What do I always do the same way? Well, let me just do it a little bit differently. And what's the perspective change? So the lessons you learn in the woods, you can take to other parts of your life as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in today. And if you'd like more information on what you've heard on this segment of today's show, visit our website at www.fromthewoodsky.org. Stay tuned now for Wildlife Sounds from the Forest.
You've been listening to From the Woods, Kentucky with co-hosts Renee and Laura. We'll be right back after this short break.
Welcome back to Wildlife Sounds from the Forest. I'm Dr. Matt Springer, Assistant Extension Wildlife Professor in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. Before I tell you what that sound was you heard at the beginning of the show, let's play it again for you.
Okay, Matt, I think most people know what that sound is, but you've brought someone else in here today.
Yeah, so we have a special guest, and it's going to be a series of these wildlife sounds that we're going to use and abuse him since he's here. He just did another show for us. We have Zach Danks, who is the Rough Grouse and Turkey Coordinator for Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. Mm-hmm. He is here. He's going to provide a little insight, because we're kind of going off this theme of what we're going to do for the next couple shows is a theme of young forest species and trying to emphasize the importance of that habitat type. So for that species that we just heard, that was whippoorwill. Very common one that a lot of people hear in the spring, early summer, if you have any kind of forest block around your house. And unfortunately, they're not doing so great. Now, if you're further south, as Zach pointed out to us as we were getting ready to prepare this, we hear a different species. That sounds very similar. Mm-hmm. Zach, do you want to take over there and talk about that one?
Yeah. So I'm from Logan County, Kentucky, which is in sort of southwest. We have both of these species. Okay. But where my parents live, it's a little more open habitat. There's smaller woodlots. And the bird you're going to hear, the second one we heard there was Chuck-Will's widow. And they're neat because they're practically, super similar to whippoorwill in terms of how they look, how they act, how they feed. They're nocturnal. They got this big gaping mouth, and they swoop in the middle of the night and eat bugs. Mm-hmm. You might see them sitting on a gravel road in the middle of the night. That's about the only time you'd see them. Truly, truly neat critters. But they're found more in a little bit more open habitat, so more farmland, a little bit less woods, and a little bit kind of the southern tier half of Kentucky, probably a little more abundant. But you certainly can get both occurring in the same general area, so they're very neat.
So what do they eat?
Well, they're insectivores. They eat a lot of different flying insects. They feed with that big gaping mouth. They actually feed while they're flying around. So think of them as another version of bats in many ways. They have their own special way of locating them. They have oil in their jaws, basically, that allows them to kind of detect where birds are. They're really a unique species. And the one I actually grew up with, being that I'm from an urban environment, is actually the nighthawk.
Yes, that's a good one too.
Yeah, they're all related, and they all
Absolutely.
fall into the same family.
Yeah, find a street light in a small town somewhere. Look up at right after dark, and you'll hear them. It's a neat sound.
Yeah, and then they do this basically swoop thing that makes this the air going over their wings makes a really unique sound. Which we don't have on Wildlife Sounds of the Forest, but that's okay. It's an urban sound. We'll just call it an urban sound. Unfortunately, not doing so great. I don't know if you can speak a little bit to some of the work that's going on. I know there's a little bit. Are you aware of any of the research projects or the monitoring?
So the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife, we do Nightjar surveys. So these three species we just mentioned, eastern whippoorwill,
Chuckwill's
widow, and common nighthawks, they're all called nightjars collectively. That's the family that they're in. There are other species in the same family in Central America, South America. It's neat. But they are tied to habitat. Whippoorwill I'll use specifically, and they're not doing so hot because the structural stage of the forest they really like is not, is declining. So the younger, shorter trees, patches of younger, earlier successional vegetation they really depend on, because those habitats harbor insects. Mm-hmm. If you lose those habitats, you lose the insects, you've just lost the food source for whippoorwills, so we don't hear them as much now. That's really, in a nutshell, why they're not doing, or one of the reasons. And a lot of these songbirds are migratory, so they also have the challenge of what happens on their winter range when they leave North America or our part of the world and they fly south. There are impacts to their habitats down there too, but that's generally why whippoorwills are not doing well up here.
Yeah, another complexity of wildlife management. Whenever you get into migratory species, you're crossing state borders, you're crossing country borders, and sometimes continental issues. So it gets complex and difficult. One of the other interesting facts we'll throw out there, because I try to, is ground nesters. So they're one, and they're highly, their coloration very much dictates survival for that reason. They're super cryptic. Yeah. I've almost stepped on several of them on the ground, and they won't move a lot of the time. So they're going to try hunker down, and you would never know.
So are they in a brush pile, or
in the
just
leaves on the ground?
In the leaves on the ground. Wow.
Right. Yep. In a clear-cut area that has grown back up. I mean, the edges of big woods, young woods, places where fires have occurred in the woods. I mean, anywhere that's disturbed.
Yep, they're definitely closely tied to disturbance and regeneration. So, and unfortunately, because of their decline, you guys have some projects going. I know there's some flyway-wide research going on where they're actually putting transmitters on these animals, and there's an entire tower network now that's in place that is growing, that allows us to pick them up as they go up and down migration. It's used in woodcock studies now and bat studies, so it's just one of the ways that we're getting more information and hopefully allowing us to better manage for these guys in the future.
So how long do they normally live, and how many eggs do they have at a time?
I'm thinking maybe 4. I kind of want to say 4 for whippoorwill, but I honestly can't remember. They're not going to be super long lived. I mean, I would be shocked if they're more than 3-4 years old. But
yeah, it's one of those where they probably can live into double digits, but how many of them actually make it there is probably pretty slim.
Yeah, they're living on the ground, so they're probably easy.
Nesting on the ground.
Yeah.
Yep. So and they're larger birds, and not necessarily the most dynamic of flyers. They have a little bit of agility, but not like, say, a mourning dove. So they would probably make a pretty easy meal for hawks.
Compare it to
they're about the size.
Robin turkey.
They're about the size of a mourning dove. Pretty close to it. Maybe a little bigger.
Little bigger, maybe, but virtually the same. And their flight, they need kind of the open areas. So in a super dense, cluttered forest, closed canopy, middle-aged forest, they're probably not going to be so nimble. And again, there's not so many bugs there for them to feed on, so like there would be in a more open, regenerating forest area. That's a
Yeah.
highly skewed distribution, so it's probably most of them don't live that long, but they can, like you said, live longer.
It's a matter if they get through their first 2 years.
Yeah.
It's like most birds.
So probably most won't even last 2 years or even 1 year.
Oh, okay.
6
Yeah.
months.
So yeah,
Well, thanks for coming in and talking about them.
you're welcome.
Thank you for joining us today. If you'd like more information on what you've heard on this segment of today's show, visit our website at www.fromthewoodsky.org.
Hey there. If you're enjoying this podcast from WRFL Lexington, you may enjoy our live radio stream at WRFL.FM and, of course, via radio at 88.1 FM in the Central Kentucky area. We have a wide variety of programs you're sure to enjoy. Just go to WRFL.FM/schedule and see what programs appeal most to you. Thanks again for listening to this podcast from WRFL Lexington.